My husband accused me of draining our savings. Until the bank manager recognized the real customer on the security footage, there's a particular way a man looks at you when he's already decided you're a liar. It's not anger, not at first. It's something colder than that, a kind of clinical distance, like he's already filed you under a category in his head and is just waiting for you to confirm it. That's the way Travis looked at me across our kitchen table the night he slid a bank statement toward me and asked very quietly where $22,000 of our savings had gone. My name is Heather. Travis and I had been married for 9 years at that point, together for 11. We had 2 kids, a mortgage, the kind of ordinary, unglamorous marriage that mostly runs on routine and shared logistics rather than grand romantic gestures, which honestly, most of the time, I was fine with. We built a joint savings account together over the better part of a decade, disciplined, boring, the unsexy kind of financial responsibility that means skipping vacations some years so you can handle emergencies without panic later. Watching that account, watching it grow slowly and steadily, had genuinely been one of the quiet sources of pride in my adult life. So when Travis told me on a random Tuesday night in October that it had been drained down to almost nothing over the past 4 months, I felt something in my chest actually drop. What are you talking about? I said, and I remember my voice coming out smaller than I wanted it to, because some instinctive part of me already understood this conversation was going somewhere bad before I'd even processed the actual information. He turned his laptop around so I could see the account activity himself. 11 separate withdrawals over 17 weeks. Different amounts ranging from about $1,200 to just under $4,000 each time, always in cash, always at the same branch. A location about 20 minutes from our house that neither of us used regularly since we usually banked at the branch closer to Travis's office. Total damage, just over $22,000, nearly our entire emergency fund, the one we'd been building specifically in case one of the kids ever needed something serious, in case either of our jobs ever fell through, in case life did what life sometimes does. I didn't do this, I told him, and I meant it with every part of me, but I watched his face while I said it and understood in that specific sinking way that he didn't believe me. Not even a little. Heather, it's our joint account. Who else would have access? That question sat between us for a long, ugly silence because the honest answer was I genuinely didn't know. We were the only 2 names on that account. No shared banking with extended family, no joint access we'd granted anyone else, nothing that would explain 11 cash withdrawals I had absolutely no memory of making. That first night after the kids were asleep, Travis and I sat in that kitchen for almost 2 more hours going back and forth over the same handful of facts without ever arriving anywhere new. He kept pulling the statement back toward himself, scrolling through it like the answer might change if he looked hard enough. I kept asking him to consider that maybe the bank had made an error, that maybe someone had somehow gotten access to our account information, anything other than the explanation his face had already settled on before I'd even had a chance to defend myself. He wasn't cruel about it, not that first night. He was almost worse than cruel. He was patient with me in the specific, condescending way you're patient with someone you've already decided is lying, nodding along to my confusion like he was waiting for me to tire myself out and just admit it. I'm not asking you to confess to crime, he said at one point, and I remember that word landing like a slap, crime, like I was already standing in front of a judge in his mind instead of sitting across from him at our own kitchen table. I just need you to be honest with me. Whatever it is, gambling, some kind of online thing, I don't care what it is, I just need to know. There's nothing to be honest about, I told him, and I could hear my own voice cracking slightly, not from guilt, but from the specific exhaustion of trying to prove a negative to someone who's already made up his mind. I didn't touch that money, Travis, I don't know how else to say it. He didn't believe me that night. I went to bed alone in the guest room, which had never happened once in 9 years of marriage, not during any fight we'd ever had before, and I lay there in the dark running through every single day of the past 4 months trying to account for myself, trying to build some kind of internal alibi for a crime I hadn't committed, which is a genuinely disorienting thing to do to your own memory. I want to be honest about how the next several days actually felt because I think that's the part people gloss over in stories like this, jumping straight to the dramatic reveal without sitting in the awful, disorienting middle. It felt like being slowly erased. Travis didn't scream at me, didn't throw accusations around the house in some big dramatic blow-up. What he did was worse, in a way. He got quiet, careful. He started asking small, pointed questions disguised as casual conversation, where I'd been on specific dates, why I'd been running errands alone more than usual lately, whether I'd been stressed about money in ways I hadn't mentioned to him. Every question had an edge underneath it, a soft accusation wrapped in the language of concern, and I found myself, within about a week, second-guessing my own memory of ordinary days I couldn't specifically account for because who actually remembers exactly where they were on a random Tuesday 4 months ago? I called my sister Deanne about 5 days into this, mostly just needing someone to talk me down off the ledge of my own spiraling thoughts. Even she, someone who loved me and had known me my whole life, asked gently, carefully, is there anything you haven't told him? Like a shopping thing or I don't know, gambling, something you might be embarrassed about? And I remember sitting there, stunned that even my own sister's first instinct was to wonder what I might be hiding rather than to simply believe there had to be another explanation entirely. That was, I think, the loneliest moment of this whole ordeal, realizing that an accusation, once spoken out loud by someone who's supposed to know you best, has a strange gravity to it that pulls even the people who love you into orbit around the possibility that it might be true. Travis suggested about 10 days in that maybe I should talk to someone, which on the surface sounded like concern, but in context landed like one more brick in a wall he was quietly building around the idea that something was wrong with me specifically, some hidden compulsion or secret I hadn't disclosed. I refused. Not because I don't believe in therapy, I do deeply, but because accepting that suggestion in that moment would have felt like agreeing with the premise that there was something to explain about my own behavior, when I genuinely, truly had no explanation to give because I hadn't done anything. The house itself started to feel different during those 2 weeks, in ways that are hard to fully explain to anyone who hasn't lived through something similar. Travis started quietly reviewing our other accounts, our credit cards, our mortgage statement, not asking me directly, but leaving them open on his laptop screen where I'd obviously see them, a silent kind of surveillance dressed up as forgetfulness. He started coming home a little earlier than usual, which I initially mistook for an attempt to reconnect before I realized, from a comment he made about my car being in the driveway right on schedule, that he was actually tracking when I came and went. I found out later during one of our counseling sessions that he genuinely considered pulling up the location history on my phone during that stretch, something he'd never once thought to do in 9 years of marriage before that October, and something he ultimately didn't go through with, though the fact that he'd gotten close enough to seriously consider it told me more about where his head had gone than almost anything else that happened during those weeks. I stopped sleeping well. I started rehearsing conversations in the shower, building arguments and evidence for a case I shouldn't have needed to build at all, not against a stranger, not against a coworker, but against my own husband in my own home about my own life. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being disbelieved by someone whose belief you'd never once had to earn before, and I don't think I fully understood how much of my sense of safety in that marriage had been built on the assumption that Travis's default setting toward me was trust, not suspicion, until I watched that setting flip so easily. What finally shifted things wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a spreadsheet. I've always been the more detail-oriented one in our marriage when it comes to logistics, which Travis has actually teased me about for years, calling me his human calendar. So about 2 weeks into this nightmare, sitting at the kitchen table one night after the kids were asleep, I pulled up my own phone's location history, our shared family calendar, my work schedule, and started cross-referencing every single withdrawal date against where I had actually provably been that day. The pattern that emerged stopped me cold. Every single withdrawal had occurred on a weekday between roughly 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, and every single one of those windows I had been at work. Not vaguely at work, provably at work, badge in and badge out timestamps from our office security system, meetings on my calendar with other attendees who could confirm my presence, in 2 cases actual video calls I'd been on that were still saved in our company's meeting archive. There was no possible way I had personally walked into a bank branch 20 minutes from our house and withdrawn cash on any of those 11 occasions. I hadn't even set foot in that particular branch in over a year. I remember sitting there at nearly midnight, the kitchen silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, staring at a color-coded spreadsheet I'd built almost without meaning to, red cells for withdrawal dates, green cells for confirmed work attendance, and feeling something shift inside me from panic into something colder and steadier. For 2 weeks, I'd been operating from a place of trying to prove I wasn't guilty. Looking at that spreadsheet, I realized I'd actually been building something better than an alibi. I'd been building proof that whoever had walked into that branch 11 times over 4 months, it categorically could not have been me, not once, not ever, and that was a fact no amount of suspicion could argue with. I printed 6 pages that night, stapled them together, and went to bed for the first time in almost 2 weeks without rehearsing a defense in my head. I laid all of this out for Travis the following night, printed timestamps, calendar screenshots, badge logs I'd requested from our HR department under the vague pretense of verifying my hours for a project. I watched something shift in his face as he went through it, page by page, the cold, clinical certainty from 2 weeks earlier cracking slightly into something more uncertain, though not yet fully into an apology. Okay, he said slowly, still frowning at the pages spread across the table. So if it wasn't you, then someone else had access to our account, I finished for him, or someone impersonated me at that branch, which means we need to go talk to the bank. Today, not later this week, today. To his credit, Travis didn't argue with that. We drove to the branch together the next morning, both of us tense and silent in the car in a way that felt different from the silence of the past 2 weeks. Less accusatory, more like two people bracing for something neither of us understood yet. We asked to speak with a manager and were introduced to a woman named Deanne, which caused a strange little jolt for me given my sister shared the name, a small, oddly grounding coincidence in an otherwise deeply unsettling morning. Deanne pulled up our account activity on her end and confirmed the 11 withdrawals matched what Travis had originally shown me. She then asked, carefully professionally, whether we'd like her to pull the branch's internal security footage for those specific transaction windows, since each withdrawal would have a corresponding timestamp tied to a specific teller interaction. I said yes before Travis even finished nodding. It took her about 20 minutes to locate and queue up the relevant footage from their archive system, 20 minutes that felt considerably longer sitting in that small back office with Travis beside me, both of us staring at a blank monitor, neither of us saying much of anything. When Diane finally pulled up the first clip and hit play, I felt my whole body go tight with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Hope that this would finally prove what I already knew, dread that somehow, impossibly, it might show my own face after all, some explanation I genuinely couldn't account for. It didn't show my face. Footage showed a woman at the teller counter, mid-length dark hair similar to mine, roughly my build, wearing a jacket that I'll admit wasn't dramatically different from something I might own. From a distance in a grainy overhead security angle, I could understand in a purely abstract way how someone glancing at this footage quickly might assume it was me, but it wasn't. And more importantly, Deanne, the branch manager, recognized her immediately the second the footage came up on screen. Oh, Deanne said, sitting up straighter, leaning toward the monitor. I know her, that's Courtney. She's actually one of our regular customers, comes in a few times a month. Deanne paused, something clicking into place on her own face as she looked between the screen and me, back and forth comparing. She doesn't look that similar to you in person, honestly, but on this camera angle, with this lighting, I can see how someone reviewing a transaction log after the fact might get confused if they were just going off the account name and a quick glance. What Diane explained next took the story somewhere neither Travis nor I had considered at all. It turned out our joint account had, at some point roughly 5 months earlier, been affected by a data error during a system migration the bank had undergone, one that had briefly, erroneously, caused a small number of customer accounts to display incorrect linked names on certain internal teller screens due to a database indexing glitch. A genuinely rare but documented issue that the bank's fraud department was already aware of from a handful of other customer complaints filed around the same period. In our case, specifically, our account had been briefly cross-linked in the teller display system with another customer's profile, this Courtney, due to a shared partial account number sequence during the migration error. For a window of several months before the glitch was caught and corrected, tellers processing Courtney's withdrawals had occasionally seen my name populate alongside the transaction on their internal screen due to the corrupted linkage, even though the money itself, critically, was never actually pulled from our account balance in the bank's core ledger. It only appeared that way on our own online statement due to a related display error mirroring the same glitch. I'm not going to pretend I fully understood the technical explanation Diane gave us that day, something about a database migration and a shared indexing key and a mirrored display error, and honestly, I don't think it matters that much for the purposes of this story. What mattered was this: I hadn't taken a single cent. The money, it turned out, once the bank's fraud and technical teams did a full manual reconciliation over the following week, had never actually left our account at all. It had been a display error the entire time, a genuinely bizarre low-probability glitch that had, through pure bad luck, made it look for 4 months like our real savings were disappearing in cash withdrawals that belonged entirely to a different customer's real, legitimate transactions. The bank issued us a formal written apology, adjusted our statement to reflect our actual untouched balance, which arrived back to normal the following billing cycle, and Diane personally called us twice over the following 2 weeks to make sure everything had resolved correctly on our end, which I appreciated more than I probably let on at the time, because by that point I was still so raw from the previous 3 weeks that even kindness felt disorienting. Here's the part of this story I still think about more than the glitch itself, though more than the $22,000 that had never actually left our account. It's the 3 weeks in between. It's the way Travis looked at me across that kitchen table before we had any answers at all, already leaning toward believing I was capable of secretly draining our family's safety net and lying to his face about it for months. It's the way my own sister's first instinct was to ask what I might be hiding rather than to simply trust that there had to be another explanation. It's the fact that an entire system, an entire circle of people who supposedly knew me, tilted so easily toward suspicion the moment a number on a screen suggested I might have done something wrong. I didn't yell at Travis in that bank office, in front of Deanne, in front of the security footage that had just cleared my name. I waited until we got home, until the kids were at school, until it was just the two of us at that same kitchen table where this whole thing had started. You looked at that statement, I told him, and your first thought wasn't that there might be a mistake. Your first thought was that I'd lied to you for months and stolen from our own family. That's what I can't get past, not the money. That. Travis didn't have a great answer for that, and to his credit, he didn't try to manufacture one. He apologized, genuinely, more than once, over the following weeks, in ways that felt earned rather than performative, small, consistent efforts rather than one dramatic grand gesture meant to erase 3 weeks of being treated like a suspect in my own household. We did end up going to a counselor together eventually, which is a strange, quiet irony I still notice, given that a few weeks earlier he'd suggested I needed one on my own, framed as a concern about my supposed hidden financial secrets, when it turned out the thing our marriage actually needed fixing wasn't me at all. It was the reflexive distance he'd been so ready to put between us the second something looked wrong, before he'd bothered to ask enough questions to find out if it actually was. The counseling itself was harder than I expected, not because I didn't want to go, but because it forced both of us to actually sit with the specific mechanics of what had happened rather than just moving past it, the way couples sometimes do when the underlying problem technically resolves itself. Our counselor, a calm, unhurried woman named Grace, asked Travis directly in our third session why his first instinct upon seeing that statement had been suspicion rather than partnership, why "let's figure this out together" hadn't been the sentence that came out of his mouth instead of an accusation dressed up as a question. He didn't have a clean answer. He talked haltingly about his own father, about growing up watching his parents' finances fall apart over what turned out to be his father's hidden gambling debts, a story I'd heard pieces of over the years but never fully understood the weight of, until Grace helped him connect it to the reflex that had taken over him at our own kitchen table. It didn't excuse what those 3 weeks had cost me, but it did explain it, and there's a difference between those two things that took me longer to make peace with than I expected. We're better now, genuinely, though I won't pretend those 3 weeks didn't leave a mark that occasionally still surfaces, usually in small moments, an unexpected bank notification, a slightly larger than normal charge on a statement, and I'll notice Travis pause for just half a second too long before saying anything, like he's actively working to override an instinct he's ashamed of having developed. To his credit, he catches himself now every time and says so out loud, which is its own small ongoing act of repair I've come to appreciate more than any single apology could have covered on its own. I think that's probably as honest an ending as this story gets. Not a clean, total resolution, but two people who went through something ugly and are slowly rebuilding the kind of trust that shouldn't have needed rebuilding in the first place. Our savings account is back where it should be now, slowly climbing again the boring, disciplined way it always had before any of this happened. Sometimes I still think about Courtney, the woman on that security footage who never knew and probably still doesn't know that her ordinary bank visits nearly cost me my marriage due to a glitch in a database migration she had absolutely nothing to do with. I hope her life is simple and uneventful, genuinely, because mine had more than enough complication for both of us that particular October. People like to say the truth always comes out eventually, and I used to nod along to that phrase without really examining it. Now I know it a little more specifically than I ever wanted to. Sometimes the truth is sitting on a server somewhere, in a grainy overhead security clip, waiting for the one person in the room who happens to recognize the actual face on the screen. I got lucky that Diane was working that day, that she personally knew Courtney, that the footage existed at all and hadn't been auto-deleted before we thought to ask for it. I try not to think too hard about the version of this story where none of that lines up, where the footage was gone, where no one at that branch recognized anyone, where it just became my word against a bank statement Travis had already decided told him everything he needed to know. That's the version that still visits me sometimes late at night, the one where nobody ever found the real customer at all.